All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see some people are still rolling in, but we'll get started. Thank you for attending today's webinar. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Everybody's muted, but we encourage you to use the Q&A feature for any questions and comments so you have one place to go. We'll be addressing those questions and any submitted before the webinar at the end of our session. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our hosts, Tony and Cheryl.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Cheryl Lass, and I'm joined by our CEO, Tony Charles.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Okay, we're going to come back on for video when we get back to our Q&A later in the session. Okay, so let's do a quick poll. You should see a pop-up window here in just a minute that shows the actual poll question. Which of these statements best describes your organization? Do you know what skill gaps you have in your organization, including the size of those gaps? And do people with those gaps know exactly what to do about them? Do you know exactly what skill gaps you have, including the size of those gaps? Do you know exactly what skill gaps you have, but you don't know the size? And do you not know at all, but you'd like to know what skill gaps you have and the size of them? We'll give you just another minute. Hannah, you can close the poll whenever you've got some good responses. Okay, well, I think you've come to the right place. It looks like 89% of you don't know but would like to know. So we're definitely going to cover that today. That is the main topic of our presentation, so that's great. So today we're going to talk about how to build competency models that close skill gaps and deliver results. Taking that to a higher level, one that you'd have with your C-suite, we're going to talk about and show you how to upskill and reskill at scale. Why? Well, you can't upskill or reskill without knowing the requirements. And what are those requirements? Well, the requirements are a competency model. Once you know what the requirements are, how do you know if someone can meet them? And in aggregate, how do you know what skill gaps you have in the organization and the size of those gaps? That's a competency assessment. And once you know what the gaps are, then you can close them with personalized competency-based learning. It is just that simple. Once the gaps are closed, you should have better results. And when you're trying to sell the skill gap solution to your leaders, this is your elevator pitch. You're just going to show the slide and then drop the mic. So now that you know why we connected upskilling and reskilling to a competency model and delivering results, let's talk about what you're going to learn to do today.
All right, very good. Thanks, Cheryl. So we're going to show you how to rapidly create an actionable competency model, literally in just a matter of weeks using an agile process. And obviously, there's a lot of ways that you can go about building models. But if it takes 6 months or more, what happens ultimately? The model is at least partly out of date by the time you've finished it. So the ability to do it efficiently and with agility is really important. So we're going to walk through the how-to steps and provide you with instructions and templates to help execute the steps consistently. And in fact, we're going to provide you with a number of reference documents such as templates and instructions that are going to appear on various slides. And we'll show you where to see those in just a minute and set some expectations there. You're also going to learn how to perform a competency assessment, which is frankly the point of the competency model, right? If it makes the models actionable because it allows you to identify the strengths and the skill gaps of each person, which that allows them to upskill and reskill based on their gaps. And then finally, as Cheryl mentioned a minute ago, it lets you do all of this at scale across any size organization. I think really importantly, being able to conduct this organizational skill assessment is also going to help you provide the best competency-based learning focused on actual needs of the employees. And that's actually focused on where the competency gap exists, again, by individual.
And you can call it a competency model. You can call it a capability framework. It really doesn't matter. Whatever resonates in your organization is what you should use. Now, here's a hint. If competency models have failed in the past, call it something else. The competency model itself defines the requirements. This is what someone needs, what the organization needs someone in each role to be able to do. And that should paint a picture for what it looks like to be good and great. The competency assessment itself is like GPS, because when I find out where I am now during that assessment and I compare it to where I need to be, then competency-based learning helps me to define how I'm going to close those gaps. It's the directions to get from here to there. So again, the competency assessment shows me where I am compared to where I need to be, which are the gaps. Okay, and then the competency-based learning helps you to get directions from here to there. So close your eyes for a second. Can you imagine how someone would really own their development or their career planning on their own if they didn't have a competency model and assessment? That would be really hard to do because you can't really decide what actions you need to take. So we're going to start at the beginning of the process first with competency model development.
Right. So the process is broken into 3 steps. So first, we'll talk about a rapid job analysis workshop, and then the creation of task examples or behavioral examples. And finally, we'll go through a task proficiency analysis. The rapid job analysis workshop is a 1-day workshop, and it's frankly the most important of all of the sort of sections, because it's where you get the data for the other steps. And I think that'll come to life as we talk through this. You're going to do this for a single role or for various levels of a role. Say you have a junior, mid-level, senior levels of a role. So you'll do a rapid job analysis workshop for any of those. And you can do the workshop either in person or remotely. And frankly, since COVID, we've had a lot of success doing it remotely, and I don't think there's any issue doing it that way. You're going to start by selecting, right, 4 to 6 high performers. And then I always suggest adding a manager for people in this role. And I think the manager makes really gives you a nice check, puts a nice check in place, because they have the optics of seeing a lot of performers, whereas the individual contributors just have their own lens typically. So again, start with 4 to 6 high performers plus a manager for the people in that role. And these are our participants. Now, it's really critical to only select high performers, right? We're trying to understand what high performer behavior is. So if we choose average performers, we're gonna learn what average performers' behaviors in the role are. So high performers are critical. And if you're asking yourself, like, how do I choose these folks? How do I find high performers? It's pretty simple, right? Just ask the managers, if you had a new person in this role, who would you want them to shadow to learn the best behaviors? As a facilitator, you're going to need to, and to execute this, or rather to execute this, you're really going to need a facilitator who's going to lead the session, and you're going to need a recorder who's going to document the notes. Your recorder has to be a pretty fast typist, and your facilitator really has to have great facilitation skills, especially for time management. And I think also just keeping people on track generally, if not, it can really get away from you. Both the facilitator and the recorder will participate in all of the steps that we're going to discuss. So as we've talked about sort of identifying the participants, we've got to formally invite them using the sample invitation that we're going to provide. And you'll see here there's a black document icon that indicates that there's a template here. So as we get into the invitation, it's going to be important that, because this is a brainstorming session, leveraging their knowledge and experience, there's no pre-work required. You shouldn't ask for pre-work or provide any direction about the activity in advance. If you do, it will derail the event from experience, right? We want people to come in and get their visceral reaction. We're not trying to get them to think in advance and to come up with some kind of pre-thought out, overthought out sort of answers to the questions. So again, one bit of housekeeping, that black document indicates it's a template. If you see a blue icon, it actually is an instruction document. So black is a template, blue is instructional, and we'll give you the link at the end to be able to download all of the various documents at the end of the webinar.
Okay, so now we're in the session. We've invited people, we're in the session, and we're going to use something that's called the nominal group technique. This is a technique that's designed to maximize independent thinking and also provide equal participation. So here's how it works. We're going to ask participants to do an activity, and then we're going to give them 3 to 5 minutes to do it silently on paper. So they're making their list, and then we debrief by asking each person to give us one unique item on their list really quickly without any explanation. And their input gets added to a group list that we're projecting either remotely or in person. And if people hear something that they have on their own list that someone else says, they're going to cross that item off. So that way we continue to get only unique items, one from each person, until no one has any unique items remaining on their own list. By the way, it's a really great technique that you can use for brainstorming and creativity for lots of different things. Now, there's 3 main parts to the workshop. First, we brainstorm the categories. Then we brainstorm the tasks within them. And then we debrief the tasks into examples. So first, we ask participants using this nominal group technique to make a list of all the categories of the things that they do. This is the 100,000-foot level. So for example, if we were building a generic manager role or even, a specific manager role, it would usually be 2 categories: manage my team and manage the business. But people rarely get that concise right out of the gate, and that's okay. So in this particular example, participants provided some detailed answers like you see here. There are 20 of them. And that's okay because in brainstorming, there are no wrong answers. The recorder is just going to go and document everything. By the way, you're going to see we've got instructions and the template that you'll be using. Okay, so now the facilitator is going to help the group organize them into higher level categories. So you can see that project execution up here in green was one of the bigger buckets, one of the bigger categories, and it covered 10 items that people listed initially. You can see them all color-coded here. So after brainstorming all 20 items, we got to about 4 categories. Now, we typically end up with somewhere between 2 and 6 categories. There's no magic number, but more than 6 is too much. It's just too granular. And the category brainstorm, that first step, usually takes 30 minutes to an hour. So when we're done with that, the participants all get to break. But in the meantime, the facilitator and the recorder talk and use this as an opportunity to sequence the category list from the one that they think is going to take the most time to the one that's going to take the least time. And the recorder is going to transfer these categories into the task template.
All right, so once we finish the category brainstorm, we move to the next level of detail, which is to identify the tasks associated with each category. And this is that 10,000-foot level, right? So we came from the 100,000, now we're down to the 10,000-foot level. We start with the first category, and that's the one that we think will be the longest, that we just prioritized. And we restart the brainstorming process. This time, participants will be listing all the tasks that they do in one category. And you'll give them instructions, for example, that each task has to start with a verb. Now, one of the facilitator's most important jobs is to respectfully keep people on track, which means, helping them to give their responses without explanation. Cheryl mentioned it should be kind of rapid fire. The facilitator also needs to guide the participants in how they respond, for example. So if someone says clinical knowledge, the facilitator would say, what's the verb, right? The point is to eliminate knowledge tasks, right? We want to understand what people need to do with the knowledge, not just what they need to know. And so after each task brainstorm is completed, the participants are going to take a break, and generally it's a good time for them to check email and voicemail or take whatever other break they need. And during that break, the facilitator and the recorder are going to organize the information that was just gathered. It always happens, by the way, that, and frankly, it's expected that the information that you've collected from the brainstorm will contain more than just the tasks that we're trying to get at. It's also going to contain some of the task examples and behaviors associated with the task, right? People just get more granular when they're brainstorming. So during the break, the facilitator and the recorder are going to move the data around, importantly, without deleting anything, which really makes the rest of the process much more efficient because you've already captured information that you're going to be able to apply elsewhere. And as you use this technique of moving things around but not deleting, people are going to see that their input wasn't eliminated, it was just moved, and that's obviously really important for buy-in. So as you wrap your head around this sort of task brainstorm piece, one way to think about this is that the tasks are what you do, and then the examples, which we're going to get into in a minute, are how you do it. So let's say we started off with a list of 25 ideas from the brainstorm. We'll typically end up with 6 tasks where 19 entries are really examples of those 6.
Okay, so now we've got the tasks in the category. Okay, and now we're going to drill down to the 1,000-foot level, the examples. So the way this is going to work is each person is going to own a task. And to make this more fun, we've got something you see at the bottom of the slide here. It says wheelofnames.com. It's like spinning a wheel, so you spin the wheel to determine the order of who goes first. So whoever is selected is going to pick one task that they want to debrief. So let's say that from the 6 tasks, this particular individual picks drive team development. So the facilitator is now going to ask, well, how do you do that? How often? What materials or tools do you use? And as they're asking and the recorder is recording, everything should start with a verb and be action-oriented. And as a facilitator, you're just probing. The recorder is pretty much documenting everything that each person says. But over time, the recorder can get really good and synthesize and do a little bit of rewording on the fly. And it's important, Tony mentioned respect, facilitator's job. It's important for the facilitator to prevent a free-for-all. So the way that this works and the rule that we set up is that the person doing the debrief, they have the floor until they're finished. So let's say you're probing as a facilitator and then you get to the point where it seems like they're done. Then you as a facilitator would say, are you ready to open it up to the floor? And only then are you going to ask if anyone else has something they want to add. So this provides a really respectful environment where everyone participates. The first person to do their debrief is going to take the longest as people are learning the process. And then it will, accelerate from there. And it's at this point that we introduce the concept of proficiency levels. So we talk about level 3 as good. Most of what they're giving us are level 3 behaviors. We talk about level 4 as better and level 5 as great. So once you've gathered the information, the actual examples of the how and the what tools, you then ask, what separates good from great for this task? And the recorder is going to document what people come up with. That's what gives you the level 4 and level 5 behaviors.
All right, so you've just completed that process, and as you end that debrief for the tasks, you're going to ask the participants how they learn to do these tasks. What formal and informal activities have helped them, right? Is there anything that they've created to help them get better at their jobs? And you can imagine with high performers, they can get pretty competitive, and so you're going to get a lot of great stuff if you get that conversation going. You wouldn't believe the things we've gathered that others didn't know existed within the organization. And assuming you pick the right high performers, you're going to get some best practices and some great innovations that will help the organization. And I think the best part of this, and this comes back to the why we don't delete anything, is we use everything that we're gathering. These insights into how these top performers got to be the best are both going to inform and help become some of the competency-based learnings that you can map to tasks later on in the process. And so you've completed capturing the tasks for the first category. And you're simply going to repeat that, right? So it's task by task, going through each one and gathering that information. Each one's going to get faster because of the way you organize them. And often we find that, if there's 8 categories, for example, to start, by the time we get to the 5th, people may realize everything's already been covered. And so when the last category's tasks are completed, we finish the workshop by summarizing the next steps. We make sure that everybody knows how they're going to be involved moving forward. We block time for steps on their calendars. And in fact, we don't even usually let folks leave until everyone gives a thumbs up that they've blocked a couple of hours off over the window of time. Usually it's the next 3 to 5 business days. And we'll walk you through that calendar here in just a minute.
Okay, so after the workshop is done, your work is not complete, just the participants temporarily. So you're going to polish your output, and either the facilitator or the recorder will do this. It involves editing tasks and ensuring consistency in the task examples. As you get good at this process, you can often complete a lot of the editing during the workshop itself. Again, that's as the recorder gets better and better. A well-written task makes it easy for someone to see why it's important to their job, and then makes it easy to create competency-based learning. Now, there's no magic number of tasks, typical to find 15 to 25, and it's a ratio. It typically takes a minute to do a competency assessment on a task. So if you have 15 to 25 tasks, it typically takes 15 to 25 minutes for competency assessment. And remember, a competency model doesn't define everything you do in a role, but rather just what is critical to success in the role. And that is what drives execution of their part of corporate strategy. And the polishing process typically takes 1 to 4 hours, just for your allocation.
Yeah, great. So, now that you've polished the version of the task list, you need to validate that you didn't damage the integrity of the inputs provided by the team, right? Just make sure that everything you've captured and polished still reflects the intent of the team. So you'll send the document to the participant with track changes in Word turned on and ask for validation. And because it's so similar, right? They just went through this the day before. It typically only takes 10 minutes or so for them to get their eyes on it and provide feedback. To that point, it's important to send the polished version out within 24 hours of the event, again, so it's fresh, and then ask them to get it back to you the following day. Of the 7-ish participants in a typical workshop, you're going to get some tweaks, which you're then going to integrate and finalize.
Okay, so we've got our timeline here. Let's look at where we are. If we conduct the workshop on a Monday, we get the summary out to participants on a Tuesday, and we ask for their feedback by the end of the day on Wednesday, we're still only in week 1. So based on what you've heard so far, hopefully you yourself would want to participate in such a workshop as a high performer. And that is the end of step 1.
All right, great. So step 2 of the process is to draft behavioral or task examples that describe how they would do each task, which is the what, of course. And you're defining this for each task by level of proficiency. Now, the good news is I think that you're already off to a great start, which is the notes from the workshop. And so before you can start the draft task examples, you have to clearly define your scale. This is a typical, very typical one. We like a 5-level scale because it provides enough room, right? Sufficient room for movement over time during the assessment and reassessment without being overwhelming. We all know how important it is as motivation for people to see that they're making progress, right? So I think it's easier with an example. Cheryl, can you walk us through that?
Sure, Tony. There you go. So here you on the screen, you can see an example. And again, as Tony was talking about, with 5 levels, you get a chance. It gives you the ability to actually progress, to see your progress across that. So either the facilitator or the recorder has to do this first part. So you don't just land here. This is the next step in this process is the identify task examples. And by the way, in case it wasn't 100% clear, these slides, I know we're going through kind of quickly, those will all be available for you to download. So let's say that the recorder is going to do this first part, which is simply putting the finalized task list into the template that we're providing, this task example template over here. This is copy and paste. There's no editing at this point. Now, the recorder and facilitator could actually split the next part, which is going to be the editing. So if there were 16 tasks, let's say the facilitator and the recorder each do 8 of them. That makes the work effort a lot less. So one task at a time, each one of them is going to edit the task examples only for level 3. So they're looking at just this level 3 block, and they are adding additional examples if needed. They might remove some extraneous ones. What you're looking for are about 3 to 6 bullets that would help someone to look at them and say, does this describe how I do this task? And if so, I'm at this level of proficiency. So you're going to go through your assigned tasks and you're going to edit only level 3. And then you're going to take a break, which is going to help you to stay fresh. And after you take a break, you're going to come back, and that's when you're going to edit levels 4 and 5, and then levels 1 and 2. And we want you to be sure to reference some key verbs that are found in the instructions for this process, because we've given you a lot of examples and say, start with these verbs when you're at level 4, or start with these verbs at level 5, which will really help you in the writing process. And of course, you have to reference the scale descriptions too, so that you're consistent. What's really important for levels 1 and 2 is that you want to make sure that you don't make this negative. So rather, make this about what they can do. So for example, at levels 1 and 2, they typically work on simpler things, or they do things with the support of others. In some cases, they could even be behaviors that they think are the right ones, like providing lots of detail to everyone, instead of something like tailoring the level of detail to the person you're talking to. The idea is that this is going to help people to find their blind spots. And you can see that the entire process, the examples that you see on the slide, this helps to avoid overgeneralized examples. We've seen this in the past when we've looked at other models that say things like, can do this task at a basic level. Well, I really can't identify with that. So this is a way of being able to make it much stronger and easier to use. And this step itself is going to take you about 2 to 4 days, and you'll definitely get better at it with experience. And of course, if the facilitator and the recorder are splitting them, then it does take less time.
And of course, one of the advantages of having a facilitator and a recorder sort of teaming on this is that you have 2 sets of eyes and ears helping to make sure that what's being captured is accurate and reflects the conversation. So when all of this is done, the facilitator and the recorder are going to QA each other's work. Then you're going to send it out to the participants, again, using the words track changes as pre-work for their task example workshop. So whereas the first day workshop, we didn't have pre-work, this is really, really important pre-work. In fact, I would say the pre-work is the heavy lifting for participants in this second step. That's why we had everyone block off some time after the first day of a couple of hours on their calendar, because they're going to have to read through the examples that we've drafted and make edits. Again, that'll typically take 1 to 2 hours. So if we go back to our timeline here, by Friday, you've gotten written examples, and on Monday, you QA and send it to the participants. The expectation is they review and edit Tuesday through Thursday and get back midday Friday. And so this now is time for consolidating that feedback.
Okay, so for this next step and the next workshop, we may only need the facilitator. The 2 of you can determine, or the facilitator and recorder can determine who should do it, but it's usually the facilitator. And so what they're going to do is use Word's combine feature to automatically combine multiple track change documents into one. Now, you might use other tools other than Microsoft Word. This is just our suggestion. And once you have one document with all the changes, try to clean it up a little bit and make sure that the combined document is readable. So I try to clean it up. I choose to accept any wordsmith changes that aren't really material changes that don't have to be agreed upon by everyone. And recognize some participants may contradict each other. So one person might think a particular bullet should be moved from level 3 to level 4. Somebody else thinks it should be a level 5. Someone else thinks it should be deleted. That's okay. We're going to get that covered in our workshop.
Great. So next, you're going to conduct the task example workshop, again, with the same participants. And during that workshop, you're going to discuss their feedback and come to consensus. So the instruction document that we provide describes that whole process. You're going to typically schedule 3 hours for this, although it should be completed in roughly 2 hours or less. And because of some of the variability, we always do this virtually. Of course, if you're all in the same office location, then doing it together is great, but you really don't need to. So I'd like to start with a quick review of the proficiency level descriptions at this point so that everybody has them clearly in their mind as we discuss changes. Now, during the workshop, you're going to go task by task and keep, this is again where the facilitator comes in, really keeping a tight handle on the timeline. You don't have time, frankly, to discuss every task. You only want to focus on the edits. If there are no edits to a task, move quickly to the next one and give everyone a moment to read the changes on the screen, then ask, right, does anyone disagree with the change? If no one disagrees, you're going to keep it. Asking in the negative is a really great technique as it allows you to move quickly through the items. If one person thinks an example is level 4 and another thinks it's level 5, use the description of each level, right? Is this really about advanced execution, which is level 4, or about innovating, which is level 5? Driving that kind of discussion will help get clarity and alignment. So following the workshop, there will be some time, some polishing that you need to do. And so you don't want to accept the changes that you're tracking during the workshop, just leave them there. That way you can review the changes and make sure that they're grammatically correct and that everything is properly and consistently sequenced. So either the facilitator or the recorder could do this next part. Your last step is defining the target level of proficiency someone in a role should have. What should they be able to do at a minimum to be good in that role? So if you created a unique model for a specific job role, it's most likely that the target proficiency for all tasks is going to be a level 3. That should be your target. But if you created a model for a job family or for several similar roles, so remember the junior, the mid-level, and the senior, you might need to define different targets by role. If we use the example here on the screen, right, so you see an account executive has to do it independently using the descriptors. A pre-sales person may have to support it. A sales manager might have to be able to coach it, and a sales VP might need to innovate.
So at the end of week 2, we consolidated all that task example feedback. That's the last time we saw our timeline. Then we conducted our task example workshop in week 3. We polished the output and we performed the task proficiency analysis. Ta-da! In just 3 weeks, we have a competency model that is built in the words of high performers in the role, so that when others look at it, it's going to be relevant to them. When managers look at it, it's going to help them to coach. This is practical, not theoretical, which is so important to its success. We have examples of what each task looks like at various levels of proficiency, which creates awareness of the requirements and also communicates best practices. We know what the target level should be for people in this role or in similar roles. And we even know what learning opportunities helped our high performers be able to learn these tasks, which helps us to be able to build competency-based learning. So I would like to get an evaluation of how we're doing so far. We've got a poll question that just should have popped up. Are you amazed that you can get all of this done in 3 weeks? Simple yes or no. Okay, yay, everybody is impressed. That's great. And second question, do you think you could do it and want to do it? Let's see how we're doing. I think we're still waiting for a few more, hey? Okay, so we've got yeses and maybes. So we've got a little bit of work to do, but trust me when I tell you that once you have done this approach and you've tried it once, you will be amazed at how easy it is and how unbelievably accurate and engaged the participants are, and that the results are so practical and usable. And so I think you'll want to do it more going forward. So I hope we can get the maybes to want to try it themselves.
Terrific. Thanks, Cheryl. So we're actually going to do one more pulse check here as we move into the assessment piece. So the question is, we can pop it up. Do we have that pulse check? All right, great, thank you. So do you currently use a competency assessment to identify skill gaps? And if so, what do you use? So our choices here are no, spreadsheets, LMS, TMS, or some other system. Okay, wow. So nobody's using anything other than spreadsheets or not at all. That's really helpful, and I'm glad you're here in this session. That's great. Okay, so I think to get back on gear here, remember a competency assessment measures how someone does the what, or the task, and it's the key to getting people motivated to own their own development, right? So assessment results are then compared with the target proficiency level that we just talked about. And this gives everyone a clear understanding of which tasks they're proficient in and which ones they have a skill gap in. That enables you to know exactly what to upskill and reskill at the individual and team levels. And what's really cool, I think, is that, you know, in the aggregate, the data in the aggregate provides this organizational level data. It becomes absolutely critical to helping the executive team and senior management team pursue the best and most achievable strategies. It really becomes, the data becomes like a compass or a GPS, to use Cheryl's earlier metaphor.
So this is what I always find so funny. Even if you're not, and I think there were 57% of people who are not currently performing a competency assessment, your leaders know they have skill gaps. They just don't know the quantity of them, the size of them, where they are, or frankly, how detrimental they are to their plans. And because they don't know how large or widespread they are, they don't and can't inform organizational plans, priorities, and strategy. So think about that for a minute. If you don't know what you can and can't do as an organization, how can you be successful? I mean, isn't an organization supposed to leverage their strengths to create competitive advantage? Isn't that kind of the definition? Well, how can you do that without this data? So if you're a senior leader and you don't have competency assessment data, which is basically skill gap analysis, you should be scared. I mean, you're making decisions based on inadequate data. So when it comes to understanding organizational capability, a competency assessment really gets you out of the dark and into the light where the best decisions can be made. And this is how you sell the strategy to leaders.
Great. And so this idea of a competency assessment, I think it's much easier than you think. You need two, but preferably three elements for a competency assessment. We already talked a lot about the role-based competency model for people to assess against. And then a competency assessment system is really important. It facilitates scale, privacy, and capability analytics. And then finally, personalized learning to create individual reskill and upskill action plans. So let's focus on the second one, which is the competency assessment system. We just obviously spoke at length about the first, and we'll get to the third item in a moment. So, you know, having a system is important because basic big business tools like spreadsheets that get sent around lack the privacy and control required globally from GDPR requirements, et cetera, right? So from a data privacy standpoint, it's really important to have the right tools in place. And because the volume of data is going to be substantial, you need a system that's purpose-built to facilitate the process and to generate the data reports and visualizations you can use without manual effort. You know, with the right system, this is accomplished in minutes per participant with real-time results and analytics. And we have lots of examples of clients who came to us without a system, and it was taking them months to accomplish this. And again, they get it down to minutes per participant. So here's an example of why having the right technology that facilitates the right process is so important for driving adoption across the organization, right? So let's say you have a manager, the managers assess first without having the employee do a self-assessment to begin with. Right? You're never going to get employee buy-in into the results, right? If you tell me I've got a gap and I don't believe it, I'm not likely to take any action, at least not willingly, right? So always start with the self-assessment and then add a manager assessment afterwards, and then you can optionally add in other subject matter experts to assess on top of it. Additionally, you have to ensure that the behavioral examples in your competency model are always available and in front of the person during the assessment. This ensures that all the assessments are consistent and objective, right? If you don't have those behavioral examples in front of you, the tasks are really, they become much more sort of subjective, up for interpretation. And ultimately, that will lead to misalignment and conflict between managers and employees. So employees have to be instantly connected to their own results, because that acknowledgement of skill gaps based on their own assessment is what's going to inspire and motivate action, right? When you leverage the results to provide personalized learning options, you eliminate friction to take action. They don't have to guess what they need to do and what they need to work on.
Now, once baseline assessments have been completed, you have a picture of your organization at a point in time. I'll come back to that in a minute. And those analytics can be incredibly important to executives, to department leaders, and frontline managers. And of course, hopefully to you. We're assuming that you're in a role and you're on this webinar because this is meaningful for you. So you can provide personalized learning to close skill gaps. You can pair high performers in a skill with those having those skill gaps. And you want your system to do this for you. And McKinsey just released another, they have been promoting this concept of modern mentorship, where everyone both teaches and learns. They also call it apprenticeship. So you'll see that in the literature there. And your talent acquisition strategy can be more focused so that you hire those with the skills you currently lack. Again, we're assuming that most of you, your job is ensuring that people have the skills required to do both their current jobs and also to prepare for future jobs, either as their own job evolves or the one that they want next. But without skills assessment data, you have no ability to mitigate skill gaps effectively. So a moment ago, I said that your baseline assessment provides capability data at a particular point in time. And some executives think that you could do a competency assessment once every few years. Really? Nothing changes during that time? We didn't have lots and lots of change in 2020? So when you start thinking about how fast changes happen and the short shelf life of a skill, you realize that if you actually want to drive capability in your organization, you have to create the cycle of assessment, development, and reassessment so that you have a current picture of capability at any time. Plus, you get the benefit of creating a culture of lifelong learning that drives real ongoing growth in your organization.
Great. So, you know, the latest LinkedIn workplace learning report, go ahead and cancel that, Hannah. I'm not going to do the, thank you. The latest LinkedIn workplace learning report is subtitled Learning Leads the Way Through the Great Reshuffle. It just published in April. And really importantly and interestingly, it states that organizations have to prioritize employee career development. It's a great report if you haven't read it. I really encourage you to do so. In the report, it states that employees' top 3 motivations to learn are all connected to their careers. Number 1, they say they're motivated if it helps me stay up to date during my to date in my field. Number 2, they're motivated if it is personalized specifically to my interests and career goals. And number 3, they're motivated to learn if it helps me get another job internally, be promoted, or get closer to matching my career goals. People often leave because they have little awareness of other roles for internal mobility, or they don't know what the expectations are. And so a competency assessment can be used by individuals not just to assess against their current role, but to assess their readiness for other roles. And so people won't have to make assumptions such as, I think I'm ready for that role. They're really going to know based on that assessment. So they can use personalized learning recommendations as a career development plan template to take specific action toward the role they want. And I think a well-designed competency development system will facilitate this process for the employee.
And a competency assessment during the first few days of onboarding tells the new hire exactly what it looks like to be good and great in the job. No more fumbling that, first few months. It shows them what action to take to close any gaps so that they can truly own their development. And not only will it speed their time to proficiency, but it will eliminate the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that leads to early exits within the first 6 months. The 31% quit in the first 6 months, that is a sad but true statistic. It is so hard right now to find the right people, so you want to keep them. I don't know about you, but I would have loved to have known the detailed requirements of what great looked like in my job when I started. This is going to help them do that.
So, earlier we mentioned the 3 things you need to do. And so far we focus on the first 2, right? The competency-based model for people to assess against, and a competency assessment system to facilitate what we said: scale, privacy, capability, analytics, et cetera. The last need is for personalized learning tied to each individual's reskill and upskill action plan, which connects right to what the LinkedIn data set says. And so while you can capture capability data with only the first 2 elements, you can't close skill gaps with those first 2. You need to have personalized learning available. So said another way, right? Skill gap awareness without an action plan will give you great insight, but it won't get you the business outcomes you can only achieve through a properly upskilled organization. So the goal should be that your competency assessment results include personalized learning recommendations across 70-20-10, right? That is, it's meant to help each employee close their skill gaps or increase their proficiency, just as the LinkedIn data suggests, and is key to employee satisfaction and motivation. And remember, you have a huge head start because you've already captured a lot of the learning ideas from the high performers during the workshops. So what you see here is an example of what learning recommendations might look like. Self-awareness comes when an individual realizes they can't do their job as well as they need to. And this is a critical moment of awareness, right? It's when an employee is most ready to take action. So if you provide personalized learning options that they can use to create and work against on their development plan, you can set each person on their own path towards continuous learning. And because the process leads to employees taking a targeted action, that's what allows you to scale across the organization, right? This program can work at scale. As you look at the various tools in the marketplace, it's really important that you look for a system that provides both competency assessment and self-directed competency-based learning.
Okay, so this is a graphic that we showed you earlier. It helps you to sell leaders and managers on the fact that competency models and competency assessment are essential to upskilling and reskilling. But there's another hot topic that this solution also helps you with, and that's equity. Now, I'm guessing that, we'll try the poll real quick. Do you have a strategy for high potentials? These are people who are identified as future leaders of your organization. Yes, no, or you don't know. Okay, so right, 33% across the board in terms of yes, no, and I don't know. And essentially, so these people are identified as future leaders. Usually we see that those numbers of yeses are much higher, especially depending upon the size of the organization. But because they're identified early on as future leaders, they also get considerable additional training and experiences. Now, is the process of high potentials inclusive or exclusive? Well, it's exclusive. And do you think that in some organizations, historically underrepresented groups might be also underrepresented in high potentials? Yeah, and in fact, the research proves this. So when you think about high potentials, this is really a way of providing some people with access to more growth opportunities than others. And frankly, that's not equity. There's a lot of new research that's coming out about all this. So if you want to promote organizational equity, I'm not saying to scrap your high potentials program, but there are things you can do to mitigate what's going on. And that's really to provide everyone with the opportunity to grow at their own pace. And you would do that by all the things that we're talking about. Let people do their own self-assessment, be able to see both how they compare to their current role and to other roles, and to be provided with personalized learning to close any gaps. So it's really about this line here at the top, providing everyone with the opportunity to grow at their own pace. I hope that resonates with you.
All right, great. And so sort of getting towards the end here, thinking about measuring, right? Measurement and measuring success, right? With the right system, you can really easily measure success. And it starts by measuring the leading indicator of skill growth, and that is engagement in the development process. That's also going to help you define the organization's level of culture of learning. Are people following the desired rhythm, right? Are they engaging in the process? Then you measure the lagging indicators, right? Change in skills over time, followed by change in business results. So thank you. So if you need to educate your colleagues internally, Cheryl's already mentioned this before as this sort of internal sales pitch. This outlines what you need for a successful upskilling program, and it's available to help you, again, convey that information to your colleagues.
Okay, now before we get to Q&A, and we've got a lot of great Q&A questions that have already been added into our questions panel, we wanted to absolutely thank you for your time, and also to provide you with a link to download the templates and instructions that we've mentioned throughout. So we've got this top one here in blue, the one that says Skill Director-CM-Materials. This bit.ly is going to enable you to download the materials. You can also use this QR code to download the PowerPoint for the full presentation, and we have some additional resources. I'm going to leave this slide on the screen. Tony and I are popping back on. Tony, which is the first question that you would like to address?
Yeah, I'll go through the questions and we can both sort of tag team and see here, Cheryl. That'd be great.
Sure.
And you're right, great questions here. So the first one is, who should be the right person to identify competency gaps for an employee?
Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit, but it has to start with self. If it doesn't start with self, there's no buy-in. So I should be the first person, but I may not be as self-aware as I could be. Now, those behaviors that are part of the model, that's the secret sauce. So the more that those behaviors are well-defined, as our process should make them, the easier it is for me to go, oh my gosh, I am not where, I thought I was a 4, but now I look at this and I'm a 2. I'm going to be a lot more self-aware with good behaviors. So in theory, the individual should become more self-aware with those good examples. And then, as we talked about, the manager would be able to come in and provide their viewpoint, and that it creates an opportunity for a rich coaching conversation between the two, especially if there are any perceptual differences. They might even still agree to disagree. And then there's also the option, you could have the option to let subject matter experts or peers weigh in.
Great, Cheryl. Thank you. That's a great response. And let's go to the next question. what are some things to think of when looking to close the gaps in learning in a very technical company? And I'm going to defer to you on this, Cheryl.
Oh, thanks, Tony. We have a lot of customers who do this, and one of the things that's really that is challenging. So when we talk about personalized learning, let's say there's a new type of coding language, and I'm not going to go list a couple of them, like something like R or JavaScript, right? Let's say there's a particular language that people need to be aware of. Well, the actual learning content changes so frequently that often we recommend using something like dynamic curation. So instead of pointing to a specific object, let's say if you have a subscription to a technical provider like Pluralsight, you could use dynamic curation that would basically pass the task. What does somebody need to be able to do to Pluralsight, and then generate personalized learning results that show the most current results that are in the system. So we call that dynamic curation, and it's as opposed to curation, which is pointing to something specific. The other thing to do there is that you want to recommend experiential learning, is that you want to say something like, and you might have seen it when we showed our example of personalized learning recommendations. We strongly believe in experiential learning. So work with a task-based mentor on a specific project, write a piece of code, troubleshoot a particular thing, and then have somebody provide you with feedback on how you did. Explain what you did. So experiential learning, and we have a whole separate webinar on that we'll be doing as well, and that we have a recording that we can share, which is you have to apply, then you have to get feedback. So you introduce them to the concept, but that you let them practice those two things. And when you talk about technical, especially where the skills change so often, experiential is key.
Great, Cheryl. Thank you. Let me take this next one, and then you can add on, Cheryl. It's how do you show the ROI of closing skill gaps? And I think this is really important for us as a company, and something we're very focused on. There's some more traditional ways that L&D has tried to look at the ROI of these programs, things like ESAT, or employee satisfaction, and regrettable turnover. And I think those are really meaningful and important approaches to measuring return on investment. As L&D continues to evolve and is becoming a much more, I think, strategic function within the corporation, the ability to actually connect to hard metrics, to business metrics, I think is never been more important. And this is the direction that we're going as a company, trying to help our clients demonstrate return on investment via these harder business outcomes. So for example, we have one client who's been able to correlate their competency models, their competency framework, so specific tasks, to business outcomes in their sales organization. For example, they're able to say, if our sales executives or account executives have this level of proficiency, we see that they have a 2 or 3 times greater likelihood of achieving sales quota than sales account executives who don't. And then conversely, they're able to say, if account executives are lacking in this particular skill or task, they are, in this case, it was very interesting, 3 to 4 times more likely to miss quota. So really important data to be able to guide the organization in terms of where they should be focusing their efforts broadly, and then at the more granular level, the employee can be guided by their manager and independently to upskill where they have gaps. We also, in addition to sales, obviously other hard metrics. So if it's a IT organization or development organization, it might be lines of clean code. Like, what is the most important productivity or business metric? And that's what we want to try to tie to. And the model, if it's done right, as we've outlined, should absolutely point you in the direction of what's going to achieve the best results.
Thanks, Tony. And I was going to say also, when it comes to technical, is cycle time. And if you are in the customer experience area, it could be, again, customer satisfaction. It could be the customer experience scores. So there can be a lot of different ways, but cycle time is a good one for technical organizations. I also put something else in to answer the question online. We have a business case template that you can use to calculate your own ROI for why you should take action, like the cost of not closing skill gaps. So it's sort of the reverse answer of the question, but it's a good one if you need a template.
So I think, Cheryl, we've got a minute left, and there's a couple of questions that tie into this. So I'm gonna just go to a different question, which is, how do we build and maintain skills inventories at scale? I think that's a really good question to end on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the when everybody is doing their, well, first off, the competency models themselves create the inventories of required skills. The competency assessment, and remember I said it needs to be assessed, developed, reassessed, so that you always have a clear picture of that at any time. That creates your real skills inventory. Who can do what? If you do that every 3 years, there is no way you actually know who really has the capability. And if you build a good competency model using this approach, then you truly know what people can and can't do in a very specific way, so that you do know who to hire, you know, what to be going after from a talent acquisitions perspective. So that enables you to both build them at scale and maintain them at scale, because you're not doing anything. If you have a competency assessment system and you have good processes in place to ensure that people are engaged in their development and their reassessment, they will maintain themselves so that you can build and maintain those inventories at scale.
I think we're out of time, but Cheryl, thank you for that last insight. And thank you all for attending. Anything that we need to share from a housekeeping standpoint?
Nope, just to make sure that you use those links. And if there are any other questions, our contact information is also on the slide. Feel free to reach out to us or on our LinkedIn account or LinkedIn group. So great to see you all, and hope to see you again on another webinar. We've got a series.
Yep, and everybody will receive a follow-up email with links. So Hannah has that scheduled. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.